bridge.
What the hell is this? Move!
No! Please! You can't cross that bridge!
Who says we can't?
Because something is terribly wrong.
Easy there, sweetheart. Hold on. Let her talk.
Someone tampered with it. The support beams, they've been cut.
Cut? You actually expect us to believe that?
I'm begging you. Don't ride across together. Not today. Not now.
Here. Get yourself something to eat.
Keep your money. Just turn those bikes around. Please.
Something's wrong. Shut them down.
Some things are destroyed in the dark so quietly that no one ever calls it what it is. 3 in the morning, no moon. Beneath the Hadley Bridge, where no streetlight reaches, a small orange glow is dancing. A cutting torch. Sparks scatter in bunches and fall away into the black gorge below. A gloved hand. A man working fast and clean. A man who knows exactly what he is doing. He cuts into the load-bearing steel, into the exact points a person outside the trade could stare at for a year and never think to look. And he does not cut all the way through. He cuts just enough that the bridge still stands, still looks ordinary, right up until the moment the right weight crosses it. Then the sparks die. The hand is gone. And by morning, the Hadley Bridge looks exactly the way it has looked for 60 years. The most frightening thing is not that the bridge is about to fall. It is that tomorrow morning, not one single person will notice. By tomorrow, 19 people will ride across this bridge. And in the whole town, only one person can see what is wrong with it. And by some cruelty, that one person is the very one the whole town has decided not to look at. That morning was cold. Imani Brooks sat hunched on the concrete step of a shut-down laundromat, the place she slept when it wasn't too cold. She breathed into her hands, rubbed them together. Her stomach growled once, and she ignored it. She bent and retied a shoelace, a length of orange parachute cord she'd found somewhere, knotting it back where it had slipped loose. 19 years old. No home. In the town of Marlow, people had learned to let their eyes slide right past her, the way you slide past a trash can. It was easier, but if anyone had bothered to stop and look, they would have seen something strange. This girl did not look at the Hadley Bridge in the distance the way people look at a bridge. She looked at it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Her eyes traced every line of steel, every joint, every fall of shadow. And for 2 days now, one shadow under the Hadley Bridge had been falling wrong. It was telling her something she wished it would not. Her hand drifted up to her chest without her meaning it to, and touched a small hard thing under her shirt. A habit she had stopped noticing a long time ago. She did not know who to warn. She only knew one thing, as surely as she knew her own name. That bridge would come down under the right weight. And today, the weekend of the memorial ride, weight was coming. You hear them before you see them. 19 Harleys, the engines bouncing off both walls of the gorge, rolling into Marlow like a low storm. The Ironwood Riders. Veterans, every one of them. Once a year, they ride out to a cemetery on the far side of the gorge to lay flowers for the brothers who never came back. And the shortest road, the only one that gets them there in time, runs across the Hadley Bridge. At the front rode Walt Mercer, the club's leader, a former Marine, gray beard, the eyes of a man who has buried too many friends. Beside him, Boone Hatcher, big, loud, suspicious of everything. Ray Delgado, the youngest, once a field medic. Curtis Vaughn, so quiet that people forgot he was there. And a man named Eli Tran, riding at the edge of the pack, slow to smile, his eyes always scanning, always measuring. Across the street, in front of a coffee shop, a well-dressed man leaned against a railing, a paper cup in his hand. Hair neat, a soft, pleasant smile already set on his lips. His name was Garrett Vance. Garrett watched the motorcycles. He watched the girl on the step stand up, and very softly, almost to himself, he said one thing. I hope she's wrong. Then he took a sip of his coffee, smiled at a passing waitress, and strolled away. Imani cut across the square and walked straight up to Walt Mercer. "Don't cross the Hadley Bridge," she said. "It's going to collapse." Boone laughed. "You hear that, boys? A 60-year-old bridge is suddenly going to fall the very day we need to cross it. The girl says so." "Who told you that?" Walt asked. Not unkind, just tired. "Nobody told me. I can see it. Somebody cut the support beams under the bridge. Just enough. It looks fine. But it's made to drop under weight. Weight like 19 motorcycles." "I can see it," Boone mimicked. "From all the way over there." "You see through concrete now?" A few of them laughed. One man tossed her a dollar bill, the way you'd toss it to a beggar, and told her to move along. And here's what made it sadder than cruelty. They did not hate her. Hating takes effort. They simply could not believe that a person who looked like her could know something they did not. All of them. Except one. Eli Tran did not laugh. He stood a little apart, and he followed the line of her pointing hand. He looked at the bridge. He looked down at the cluster of beams beneath it. And his face changed color. His hand, without his meaning it to, tightened around his handlebar. He muttered, almost only to himself, "Impossible." Then he went quiet. He didn't explain. He just stared at those beams, the way a man stares at a ghost. Walt sighed and pulled on his helmet. "We appreciate the concern, kid, but we're already late. We'll take it slow." They did the half-kind thing, the thing that lets a person feel all right about themselves. Walt sent Ray Delgado jogging out to the middle of the bridge, bouncing on his heels, looking around. Ray waved back, solid as a rock. "I don't see a thing." "There," said Boone, looking at Imani. "You're wrong." Those 2 words. You're wrong. The whole town had been saying those exact 2 words to her, her entire life. The motorcycles rolled up onto the bridge. Slowly, one at a time. Imani did not leave. She stood at the foot of the bridge, her hands balled into fists, and she did the thing she always did. She watched. Out of the brush at the roadside, a startled deer bolted across the middle of the bridge. The lead motorcycle swerved hard. The tire shrieked. The rider lost his balance, slammed against the railing to keep from going down. A light impact, the kind any sound bridge on Earth would shrug off. The Hadley Bridge was not a sound bridge. There was a crash, deep and final. A whole section of railing and bridge deck, exactly where Imani had pointed, broke loose and dropped into the gorge. The rider hung half over the edge, both hands clawing, and 2 of his brothers lunged and grabbed him by the collar and hauled him backward, just before the slab of deck under his feet dissolved into nothing. Then, nobody said anything. For a long, long moment, no one could speak. Broken concrete still tumbled and settled and fell the last of the way to the bottom of the gorge. A wind moved across the gaping deck. Ray Delgado sat straight down on the ground. Boone's hand, the hand of the man who had laughed at her 30 seconds before, was shaking. He made a fist, and it shook anyway. 19 men who had been through war stood frozen on a bridge that had just swallowed a piece of itself. And slowly they turned their heads and looked back down the slope. Looked at the girl they had thrown a dollar at half a minute earlier. She was right. Boone was the first to find his voice. It came out rough. "I don't like her," he said. He swallowed. "But she just saved one of my men. And a bridge does not cut itself. Someone did this. Someone wanted today's ride to be their last, in a way none of them had ever imagined." The question was, who? And why them? You'd think that after a girl saves a man's life, a town would look at her differently. You'd think wrong. Within an hour, Marlowe had 2 stories. The first one was true. A bridge was sabotaged, and a homeless girl saw what 19 veterans couldn't. The second story was easier, and so it traveled faster. That crazy girl's been hanging around the bridge for days. Who knows what she had to do with it? People didn't hate Imani Brooks. They just needed a story that let them keep not looking at her. Out on the street, the town was quietly choosing a side. A mother pulled her child to the other sidewalk when she saw Imani coming. An old man sweeping his porch went inside and shut the door. A man mending his fence stopped, gathered his tools, and moved off somewhere else. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. But there was one man in Marlowe who did look at her. Hollis Pike, 71 years old. He ran the repair shop at the end of the street. Stooped, hands black with grease, a man of few words. When Imani passed by, he pushed a sandwich wrapped in brown paper toward her. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket to pay. Hollis waved her off. "You can pay me tomorrow." Imani stopped. "I don't have it tomorrow, mister." The old man looked at her a long moment. Then he reached over and set a bottle of water down next to the sandwich. "Then eat today," he said. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Sheriff Dale Renner arrived at the scene, and at first he did everything a good man is supposed to do. He walked the edge of the bridge, frowning down at the break. He had his deputies string up the tape. He took statements from Walt, from Ray, and when he came to Imani, his voice was almost gentle. "You're the one who saw it first, aren't you?" he said. "You saved a life today. That's good work." He nodded. "Don't you worry. Somebody did this on purpose, and I'm going to find out who. I promise you that." And Imani, who had gone so long without anyone promising her anything, believed him. For a little while. The riders believed him too. They were stuck in Marlow now. The detour was nearly 4 hours, and the memorial was the next morning. And for Walt, this might be the last one. But there was a bigger question hanging over all of them now. Somebody had just tried to hurt the whole club. And men like Walt Mercer do not ride away while a question like that is still open. There was a sheriff promising to find the truth. So they stayed. Then the cracks started to show, one at a time. So small that at first you weren't even sure you'd seen them. Eli and Walt remembered. There was an old traffic camera at the southeast corner of the bridge, pointed right at the on-ramp. If somebody had gone down under that bridge at 3 in the morning, it had seen them. They went to the town traffic office to ask for the footage. "Such a shame," they were told, the clerk's eyes sliding away. "That camera's been broken since last week." Broken since last week. The very week somebody started cutting the bridge. Eli stood there in that little office for a long moment, and he said nothing. Imani, for her part, had done something. The night of the collapse, before the tape went up, she had climbed down to the lip of the gorge and taken photographs on her cracked old phone. The cuts on the steel, clean and deliberate, the kind no natural rust ever made, real evidence. She handed her phone to Renner, still trusting the promise he had made. Renner took it, looked at the photos, nodded. "Good. Let me save these for the file." His thumb moved across the screen, once, then again. "I'll send them to my own phone here." He handed the phone back, patted her shoulder, and walked off. That night, Imani opened her photo gallery to look again. The pictures were gone. All of them. She sat in the dark, staring at the empty gallery, and tried to convince herself it was an accident. An old man who didn't know phones. A wrong button. It was possible. It was possible. But then she remembered the witness. A man in town who'd first said he heard a strange motor running under the bridge near dawn, and who the next day had changed his tune. "I didn't hear anything. You're misremembering." His eyes had slid away. Camera broken. Photos gone. Witness changed his story. Imani went looking for Eli and told him all 3 things. Eli listened, his jaw tight. He looked toward the police station for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, "This isn't a coincidence anymore." "How do you know the bridge would fall?" Walt asked. He asked it straight. No sarcasm. Really. How does a kid looking from the bottom of the slope know a thing 19 of us didn't? Imani was quiet a moment. Then she led them to the edge of the bridge, to a part still safe, and she began to talk. She showed them how the force ran down through the beams, which carried, which pulled, which cracks were time, and which cuts were a human hand. She talked about steel the way people talk about something they grew up inside of. Not knowledge from a book. Something in the blood. "My grandfather was an iron worker," she said. Her voice changed when she spoke of him. "Otis Brooks. He built bridges across 3 states. He taught me to read steel before I could read words. He said a bridge always tells you what it's thinking, if you'll only look." She touched the small thing under her shirt. "He passed when I was little. An accident on a job site," they said. When she said the name Otis Brooks, one man in the group went perfectly still. Eli Tran. He didn't say anything, but his face went white, and he turned away, pretending to look out at the gorge. That name to him was not a stranger's name. That name was something he had been carrying for 20 years. Near midnight, Walt made his decision. "We can't go to war with a whole sheriff's department," he said, his voice heavy. "In the morning, we ride. We take the detour. We try to make the service." He looked at Imani. "I'm sorry, kid." It was a reasonable decision. Safe, and no one could blame him for it. The next morning, the Harleys started up, one by one. 1, 2, 5. The whole line of them rumbling, ready to roll out of Marlow. All but one. Eli Tran sat on his bike, his hand resting on the key, and he did not start the engine. The whole line waited. Walt looked at it. Eli switched the bike off, pulled the key, and put it in his pocket. "What are you doing?" Boone asked. "I'm staying," Eli said. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking at the broken bridge. "You all go on. I've got something to do here. Something I should have done 20 years ago." Nobody understood what he meant. Imani didn't either. But she watched the quiet man turn down a service he'd ridden across 3 states to reach, just to stay beside her, a stranger. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. At the other end of town, in a warm room, Garrett Vance sat alone in front of a chessboard. There was no opponent on the other side. He played both sides himself, and he was winning both. His phone rang. He listened, his eyes never leaving the board. Someone told him that one of the bikers had not left, that he had stayed, that his name was Eli Tran. Garrett picked up a piece, studied it a moment, then set it down gently in a new square, taking another. "Then see that he's taken care of," he said, politely. "The way you'd ask someone to water a plant for you." He hung up. Then he reached out and pushed his own king forward 1 square, and he said very softly to no one at all, "Check." He went back to his game. Eli stayed, and the first thing he did, with Imani, was go looking for the hand that had held the sword. Hollis Pike planted the first seed of doubt, without ever knowing he'd done it. Eli brought him a scrap of steel he'd picked up in the gorge, a piece with a cut on it. Hollis turned it under the light, ran his thumb along the cut edge. He was quiet a long time. "This kind of cut," he finally said. "I've seen it before." He didn't say more. He didn't know more. But it was enough to make Eli start looking. Eli didn't ask anyone anything. He just sat in the town's one diner, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, and he watched. He noticed a young man, Cody, his name was, a welder, the burn marks of the trade still on his hands, drunk a lot lately, and strangely, always with money to spend. Eli drew no conclusions. He just remembered. But there was a moment, while Eli was watching, when Cody looked up and caught his eye. The two of them looked at each other across the whole street. Eli didn't look away. Neither did Cody. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. Then Cody smiled. A slow, easy smile. He climbed on his bike, started it, and rode off. He knew. He knew he was being followed, and he wasn't afraid of it at all. The next day, Eli watched Cody walk into the police station. Not the way a citizen walks in to report something. The way a man walks into his own home. He nodded at the desk officer, poured himself a glass of water, sat down in somebody's chair. Eli still said nothing to anyone. He wasn't sure yet. The thing that made him sure came from a place no one expects. An old woman at the next table, stirring her tea and gossiping with the waitress, sighed about how that Cody, the Renner boy, was drunk again. The waitress clicked her tongue. "Dale spoils him rotten. Raised him like his own son, you know." Eli set down his coffee. Cody Renner, the sheriff's own nephew. He didn't need anyone to draw him a diagram. He just sat there a while, letting it settle, and a picture he didn't want to look at slowly came clear in his mind. Eli told Imani, briefly. She listened, and she didn't say anything for a long time. She didn't need him to explain the rest. She had lived in Marlow long enough to understand the rest on her own. It meant the one person with the power to investigate this was the one person with the most reason to bury it. It meant they were no longer up against a saboteur. They were up against a badge. And they were running out of time. That morning, Renner had put out an announcement that sounded perfectly reasonable. The broken span was a public hazard. A demolition crew would come within 24 hours, clear the wreckage, haul the fallen steel up out of the gorge, and cut it into scrap. It sounded like safety. It was, in fact, a countdown. Because once that steel was cut up and hauled away, every saw mark on it, the only physical proof that the bridge had been sabotaged and had not simply fallen, would be gone forever. They had one day to prove the truth, before the truth was ground into scrap. Word reached the riders who had lingered behind, and it broke the club apart. "You all hear that?" Boone said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheriff, his nephew, a whole department. "We get into this, we don't go home. We get framed, we get arrested, or worse." "For what?" He looked around at each of them. "I still don't like any of this, but it's not our fight." Nobody argued with him. That was the frightening part. Nobody could. Walt looked at the ground a long time. Then he nodded, slowly. Imani didn't beg. She never begged. She held her papers against her chest, and she said, "I understand. Thank you for staying as long as you did." And then they really left. The engines turned over. The wheels rolled. The pack flowed out of the lot and onto the road, heading for the edge of town. Imani stood there, alone, and she watched them go. She watched the pack shrink, the sound of the engines thinning, fading into the wind. 19 taillights sliding toward the horizon, then gone around the bend. Then silence. No headlights came back. No miracle. Just a girl standing in an empty lot, holding a stack of papers no one believed, in a town that wanted her gone. This time, it really did seem like it was over. She stood there a long while. Then, from far off, an engine. One bike, peeling away from the pack, turning around, coming back. It was Curtis Vaughn, the quietest man in the whole club. The man who had barely said a word through all of this. He didn't say anything now. He didn't look at Imani. He didn't make a speech. He just turned his bike around and rode back. For Curtis, turning the bike around was a whole speech in itself. Behind him, at the bend, another engine slowed, then turned. Walt. Then Ray. Then Boone, cursing the whole way, but turning all the same. 1, 2, then all 19. They came back for her. When they had gathered around Imani in the empty lot, Walt walked over to Eli. He'd seen something in the quiet man's eyes since he first heard the name Otis. "Who's Otis?" Walt asked. Eli didn't answer. A long stretch of time went by, long enough to make people uncomfortable. "I knew him," Eli said at last. Then he was quiet again. 20 years ago, I was an inspection engineer." He looked down at his own hands. "There was a project. I knew it wasn't up to code. I knew somebody was going to get hurt." Eli took off his glasses, wiped them on his shirt, put them back on. Something to give his hands to hold on to. "I signed off on it anyway." Silence. "Everybody thinks I was forced." "No, nobody put a gun to my head." He swallowed. "I signed because I was afraid of losing my job. That's all it was, one signature to keep my own seat." No one moved. Otis tried to warn people. After I signed, nobody believed him anymore. His voice was very low. Then they said he had an accident on the site. He never came home. Eli looked up. His eyes were dry, but it was the dryness of something that ran out of water a long time ago. "I've lived with that piece of paper for 20 years. Boone was the one who spoke, and he wasn't kind. 20 years, Boone said. You sat on it for 20 years. Now you tell us, right when we need to trust you most. How do I know you're not lying all over again? Eli didn't argue. You don't, he said. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. And that, oddly, was what left Boone with nothing else to say. Then the phone in Eli's pocket buzzed. A text, unknown number, one line. Stop digging. Eli's head snapped up. At the far end of the street, a black car was just pulling away. No plates, dark glass. It turned the corner and was gone before he could make out who was behind the wheel. Someone had been standing there. Someone always was. The clock was running. At the foot of the Hadley Bridge, a heavy truck had been parked since morning. A crane. A few workers in reflective vests, measuring, marking. The demolition crew. In less than a day, they'd haul the broken steel up out of the gorge and cut it into scrap. Imani stood watching from a distance. She knew exactly what it meant. Every saw mark, every proof that this bridge had been broken by a human hand was about to be crushed and carried off. After today, there'd be nothing left to prove. Only the word of a homeless girl against the word of a sheriff. That night, at Hollis's shop, Eli fit the last piece into place. That project, 20 years ago, he said. That contractor who cut corners. I remember the man at the top of it. He was young then, a new developer, nice car, always polite. He never threatened anyone. He just smiled, and then things happened. He looked up. Now he's the richest man in Marlow. He owns half this town. His name is Garrett Vance. A chill went down Imani's spine because she had seen that man. She remembered now. The morning the motorcycles came in, a man in front of the coffee shop, nice coat, a soft smile. He had looked at her. He had looked at the riders, and he had said something under his breath, something she'd thought she misheard at the time. I hope she's wrong. He'd been standing there from the very beginning. He hadn't been worried. He'd been enjoying it. He knew the bridge was cut because he was the one who'd ordered it cut. That smile in that moment was not the smile of a bystander. It was the smile of a man who had already calculated every move. And at that very moment, down at the foot of the bridge, that man stood watching the demolition crew. Garrett Vance was not holding coffee. He was not playing chess. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the crane go up, with the easy air of a man watching gardeners trim a hedge. Renner came up beside him, lowered his voice. The girl has the old man's box. She still has the key. Garrett didn't turn his head. He looked at the bridge a moment, then said gently, almost fondly, "A tragic accident like this," he said, "ought to be cleaned up quickly. The sooner, the better, for everyone's safety." Then he smiled at Renner, gave his shoulder a light pat and strolled away. His hands, as always, were clean. Imani knew she had only one thing left. One thing she had never dared to open. She led Eli and Hollis to the place she slept, behind the old laundromat. She reached into a gap under the concrete step and pulled out a small wooden box, thick with dust. Her grandfather had left it to her when she was far too young to understand. Her grandmother had kept it until she passed. Then it was hers, along with the key she had worn around her neck all those years. A key she had never once dared to fit into the lock, because she was afraid of what she'd find. Her hands shook. She lifted the cord from around her neck. She fit the key into the lock. It slid in clean. And she opened the box. Inside, no one said a word. A construction hard hat, worn. Across the brim, 2 faded letters and the name, O. Brooks. A photograph. Otis Brooks, standing in front of the Hadley Bridge while it was still being built, smiling, hands on his hips. And behind him, slightly out of focus, a young man, also smiling. A face all 3 of them had spoken of that very night. A wristwatch. The glass cracked. The hands stopped at some hour and minute, a very long time ago. An engineering drawing, folded in 4. Down one edge of the paper, a dark brown stain, long since dried. And at the bottom of the box, a second key, identical to the one she had just held in her hand. Not one word of explanation. None was needed. It all lay there, in silence, and told the whole thing itself. Imani picked up the photograph. She looked at the face of the young man behind her grandfather for a long, long time. Her eyes did not leave it. Then she said, very softly, "My grandfather didn't die because of that bridge." Silence. 2 beats. He died because of the men who were standing on it. They had the truth in their hands. But the truth, just then, was as fragile as paper. An old photograph, a blood-stained drawing, the word of a homeless girl. Against it, a sheriff and the richest man in town. In Marlow, everyone knew which side won when that was all there was. They needed 2 things before sunrise. They needed to keep the cut steel down in the gorge, the only physical proof, before the crew ground it up. And they needed to get the box somewhere Renner's hands couldn't reach. Imani did something that turned out to matter most of all. She gave her grandfather's box to Hollis Pike. "You hold on to this," she said. "Don't come with us. You stay here." She pressed a slip of paper into his hand, a phone number. "If I'm not back by morning, or if they take me, you call this number. It's the State Bridge Inspector, not Marlow's people. You give them the box. You tell them everything you know." Hollis looked at her. The old man wanted to argue. He wanted to come. But he looked into the eyes of this 19-year-old girl, and he understood she had worked out something he hadn't caught up to yet. He nodded. He held the box against his chest, like a child. The group reached the foot of the Hadley Bridge while it was still dark. They climbed down to the lip of the gorge, where the broken beams lay waiting to be hauled up. Eli had a camera. Ray held a light. They began photographing every saw mark, every cut, doing the job the police should have done on the first day. But they weren't the only ones who knew how much that steel mattered. Headlights flared at the top of the slope, sheriff's cars, and behind them a few other cars. No markings, no clear plates. Renner's people and Vance's. They came down the only road in. Behind the riders was the gorge. In front of them was a line of headlights and figures stepping down. They were boxed in at the foot of the bridge. No way back. "Drop the camera!" Renner shouted, his flashlight swinging. "Everybody freeze! This is a sealed scene. You're destroying evidence." The irony of it was so large, no one bothered to point it out. Walt stepped in front of Amani. The whole club closed around her, a wall of men. But they had no weapons, and the other side did. Everything stretched tight, like a wire about to snap. And then Cody Renner, standing behind his uncle, drunk, panicked, and more afraid of being found out than anyone there, pulled a gun. It all happened in less than 2 seconds. The gun swung toward Amani. Cody didn't exactly mean to fire. He was just scared. But a scared hand on a trigger is as dangerous as an evil one. And the man nearest to Money, the man who had stood silent through this whole story, the man who had barely said a word, was Curtis Vaughn. Curtis didn't shout a slogan. He didn't yell. He did the only thing he ever did. He acted. He threw himself forward, knocking Amani down behind him. There was a single shot. Then nothing. When people looked up, Curtis was lying on the gravel. One shoulder was dark and spreading. Ray Delgado was already on his knees beside him, both hands pressed hard against the wound. "He's still breathing," Ray shouted. "Still breathing. Stay with me, Curtis, you hear me?" The quietest man in the club had just said the largest thing of his life, and he'd said it without a single word. The chaos was exactly what Renner needed. "You all see that?" he bellowed, though it was his own nephew who'd pulled the trigger. "They're armed, assaulting an officer. Cuff the girl." And before anyone could react, 2 deputies had wrestled Amani down, twisted her arms behind her back, and snapped the cuffs on. They dragged her off through the shouting protest of the whole club, who stood with the remaining guns trained on them, able to do nothing but watch. And just then, at the top of the slope, a man came strolling down. Garrett Vance, a cup of coffee in his hand, like the very first morning, as if nothing at all had happened. He looked at the cuffed girl, at the man on the ground, at the steel that would be ground to nothing by dawn. Every piece had landed in its square, and Garrett Vance smiled. He took a sip of his coffee. He thought he had won. He had won! For exactly 30 seconds. Then another set of headlights appeared at the top of the slope. An old truck growling its way down, and behind it 2 more cars painted blue and white. Not Marlow Police, State Police, and a vehicle from the Department of Bridges. The truck door opened. Hollis Pike climbed out. In his hands was Otis Brooks's wooden box. The old man had called a number on the slip of paper. He had not waited until morning. A state inspector came down the slope, 2 men from the bridge department behind him. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. "And who just fired a weapon?" For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Garrett Vance stepped forward. Still the coffee, still the smile. "Inspector, I'm glad you're here," he said, calm as a man welcoming guests into his home. "There's been a very unfortunate situation. A group of strangers broke into a sealed scene. A gun went off by accident. I'm sure Sheriff Renner can explain. And if he or his nephew had anything to do with this, well, I'm afraid that's their business. I just happened to be a citizen who was passing by, gently, without a blink." He had just laid the whole thing on the Renners and lifted himself clean out of it. The inspector frowned, looking around the scene. A cuffed girl, a man shot, a crowd of bikers, a sheriff. "Can anyone here prove anything?" he said. "Or is this all accusations?" And this was where Garrett played his card. "That's the real question," he said, almost relieved. "Inspector, think about what you've actually got. The word of a homeless girl, the word of a guilt-ridden biker who admits he signed something 20 years ago, and the word of a corrupt sheriff trying to save himself. 3 people, 3 reasons to lie." He shrugged. "Not one piece of paper, nothing you can put your hands on. And me, I've got a whole town to vouch for my character." The inspector was silent. He was wavering. Because Garrett was right. Everything they had, up to this second, was words. And the scale tipped back toward Garrett. The way it had always tipped toward Garrett, for 20 years. Then Hollis Pike set the wooden box down on the hood of a car. "Then let me give you something you can put your hands on," the old man said. He held up the photograph and the headlights. Otis Brooks, standing in front of the half-built Hadley Bridge. And behind him, the young face of Garrett Vance. "This man just told you he was never near that project," Hollis said. "There he is, standing right there, 20 years ago." Eli stepped up and opened the engineering drawing. "This is the original," he said, "with the materials approval signed on it. I know it's real because I'm the one who signed the doctored copy." He pointed at the figures. "The original shows they swapped code-grade steel for a cheaper grade. And this here?" He pointed to the dark brown stain along the edge. "This is Otis Brooks's blood. He carried this very drawing to report them, the night they said he had his accident." He set the cracked, stopped watch down beside it. His watch. Stopped at the exact hour they said he fell. Then he pointed down into the gorge, where the broken beams still lay, not yet ground up. "And down there is the steel from the bridge that fell this week. Send a man down to measure the cuts. Same hand, same trick, 20 years apart. The same man." Now there was paper. There was a photograph. There was blood. There was steel. There was something to put your hands on. The inspector turned to Garrett, and this time the look in his eyes was different. Garrett Vance's smile was still there, but it had gone stiff. "None of this," he said, and for the first time in the whole story, his voice came a beat faster than usual. "None of this proves I ordered anyone to do anything. An old photograph, a drawing anyone could have made. You still don't have." "I do." The voice was Dale Renner's. Every head turned. The sheriff stood there, white in the face, looking at the man he had served, covered for, and buried evidence for all these years. The man who had just wiped his own hands clean and set everything on Renner's shoulders with a single sentence. And Renner understood. Garrett would let him drown alone. "I'm not turning on you out of conscience," Renner said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm turning because you just sold me out." He spun to face the inspector, talking fast, talking all of it, like a drowning man grabbing whatever he can reach. "He ordered the bridge cut. He paid Cody in cash. 20 years ago, he gave the same order. I kept everything. Texts, payment records. I kept all of it for exactly a day like this one. It's in the safe at my house." Silence. And for the first time in the whole story, the man who never raised his voice, who never let his own hands get dirty, who had smiled for 20 years, had nothing left to say. The coffee cup in Garrett Vance's hand tilted, just slightly. A single drop spilled over the rim and fell to the gravel. His smile went out. The rest unfolded the way the truth always unfolds, once there's no one left to hold it down. The cut beams were preserved, sealed as evidence, before the sun came up. Cody Renner was arrested that night. Dale Renner handed over everything from his safe in exchange for a lighter sentence. And Garrett Vance, the man who never raised his voice, never let his hands get dirty, was finally led away in cuffs. He kept trying to hold on to a smile as they took him, but it didn't fool anyone anymore. In Garrett's safe, along with the rest of the evidence, they found an unsent letter. No signature, just one line. "The Marlowe business needs to be clean. He doesn't like loose ends." Garrett was not the man at the very top, but that is another story. That morning, as the sky was just turning gray, a crane lowered its hook into the gorge and slowly drew the broken beams up. Namani stood on what was left of the old bridge and watched them rise out of the dock. Slowly. One at a time. She didn't say anything. She just watched. 20 years at the bottom of a gorge, finally drawn up into the light. And the town that had pulled its skirts aside from her, that had shut its doors in her face, that had tossed her $1 and told her to move along. The next morning, there were people who couldn't meet her eyes. They had heard, they had seen, and they had chosen not to look. Now all of Marlow knew who had been telling the truth from the very start. 1 year later, a little girl rode her bike across the bridge, carefree, without a trace of fear. At the head of the bridge stood a new sign, Brooks Bridge. Beneath the bridge, a young woman in a reflective vest and a hard hat ran her hands along each bolt, each weld. Imani Brooks was a structural engineering intern now. On her hard hat, someone had traced over 2 faded letters and a name, O. Brooks. Not far off, Curtis Vaughan sat on a rock, watching her work in silence. Still not much for talking. He didn't need to be. On the rail of the bridge, a brown paper bag sat neatly, a sandwich and a bottle of water inside. Hollis Pike still left it there every morning, for whoever needs it. He never explained. Twice a year, 19 Harleys still rumble up into the gorge. They stop at Brooks Bridge, and then they ride on to the cemetery on the far side. They don't miss the service anymore. One of those times, Boone Hatcher broke off from the pack and walked over to Imani. He was never any good with words. He just dug in his pocket, took out a worn old dollar bill, folded it, and pressed it into her hand. "Last time somebody threw you one of these," he muttered, not looking right at her. "This time it's to say thank you." Then he turned and walked off before she could say a word. At the end of the day, when everyone else had gone, Imani stood alone at the rail of the bridge. She took off her hard hat, looked at the 2 letters and the name for a long moment. Then she looked out at the gorge, where her grandfather had fallen 20 years before, where the bridge now carried his name. She spoke, very softly. So softly only the wind could hear. "I see it now. Grandpa." There was a girl a whole town had decided not to look at, and it turned out she was the only one who ever saw.